Okay, hello and welcome to the first episode of the Feminist Fridays show. Today we're talking about beauty pageants and feminism. And we have Billie Hakenson, Navea-Huff, Mia Gato, Sharmila Parmanand, and your hosts for tonight are Beatriz Torre and me, Kristine Chan from Filipino Freethinkers. So let's start with introductions. Can you guys introduce yourselves? Billie?
Hi everyone, good evening. My name is Billie Hakenson. I am currently the Miss Universe Philippines 2024 runner-up and titled as the ambassador for gender equality. I also worked as as a flight attendant and had a degree in marketing management. So yeah.
Thank you. And Callie?
Hi everyone, I'm Navea-Huff. I'm a law student in FEU Law. I'm also a paralegal at Calleja Law Firm. And I'm a Q&A trainer of the beauty camp Aces and Queens.
Nice, nice. Mia?
Hi everyone, I'm Mia Gato. I am currently a law student at the Ateneo Law School. I graduated from UP Manila and I wrote a thesis called The Politics of Pretty, How Beauty Pageants Shape Beauty Standards in the Philippines.
Thank you, Mia. And Sharmila?
Hi, I'm Sharmila. I'm currently a teaching fellow in gender and human rights at the London School of Economics.
Nice. And thank you once again for joining this show. So for our first question, what are the controversial issues, past and present, about beauty pageants? So anyone want to say something about this?
Where to begin? Siguro, I'll just start with pageantry, just like every other industry, is not perfect. It has issues, and one of its flaw is that in its earlier version, there is a really strict standard for beauty that is very limited, wherein girls are forced to conform to it, and I think it's a very exclusive standard, and this went on for a very long time. To the point where it already became super toxic and unhealthy for the contestants, and it's only a mere source of entertainment, especially during the time when the Miss Universe pageant was owned by Donald Trump. And the girls became some sort of symbols of unattainable beauty, and the pageant editions before were viewed as objectification of women. And when I actually started joining pageants, that was also how I viewed the industry. So I think that's one major flaw of the beauty pageant industry.
Thank you, Billy. Any thoughts, Bea?
That actually made me really curious about, because generally some of the things that Billy said are things that I think most of us are familiar with. So I'm kind of curious about why you got interested in joining beauty pageants, despite being aware of these criticisms or these limitations, maybe. So I'm just curious about how you got interested in that, and I guess for Callie as well as a trainer.
Yeah,
Sorry, Billy, you go ahead.
you know what? Even up to now, I still ask myself, what the F am I doing here? But when I started with a pageant called Binibining Universidad. So it's an intercollegiate pageant wherein the prize is a scholarship, and it's I mean schools like De La Salle, Ateneo, the big universities also participate in that competition. And unfortunately, my school selected me to represent them. So I kind of had no choice but to just go for it. I didn't like it. I didn't enjoy it at first, but then after meeting the girls, I changed my mind totally. But I think that can answer other questions later on.
Yeah, and I think for me, so I started training the girls in January 2020, and Billy was part of the first batch that I ever trained of Miss Universe. And I came on because the main coach, Attorney Salud, had asked for my expertise, well, quote unquote expertise, because at the time I was the gender desk head of the Ateneo Human Rights Center. So I was doing gender sensitivity training, and I came on kind of in that aspect. So for so long, I was very much against beauty pageants. But then meeting the girls, number one, of course, you realize that these are real people, you know, that they have hopes and dreams that are not solely linked to pageantry, not solely linked to being pretty. They have careers. Billy's a flight attendant, you know, Paola Ortega, she's a nurse. You have girls like Kiara who own multiple businesses. And they were themselves so inspiring. But I also realized that my entire life I've been fighting against, because I was an athlete, that, you know, I'm not stupid, or because I like makeup, that I'm not vapid. So fighting against those misconceptions, but also telling myself that, oh, beauty pageants are vapid because, you know, you wear gowns, it just felt so contradictory. So I realized that who am I to make judgments on girls for choosing a career as a pageant queen and saying that they're not celebrating feminism when I too love all things that are makeup and gowns, and that doesn't say anything about my advocacies. So that's kind of how I got started, and I love it. And yeah, it's really been great. I think just not just talking about gender issues, but environmentalism, political discussions, and really challenging them to be aware on current issues.
Thank you. And what about Mia?
I'd like to add on to the points that were raised earlier. I think that when we talk about pageantry in general, there seems to be like a sort of power play going on. This could be understood in terms of how like the organizers are really setting the standard or particular ideal. And in the Philippines, given our history of being a colonial nation, we see that there's still that lingering essence of colonial mentality, that the Western ideal still prevails over what is our own national identity. So oftentimes we see that the women who often succeed in the pageant world are like mestiza beauties rather than native Filipinos, or Filipinos who look more Asian than Spanish in their descent or appearance. I think that's something that we still need to work on to improve how pageants can influence our society's culture or value system as a whole.
Thank you, Mia. And anything to add, Sharmila?
Yeah, just a couple of things. So, in terms of the controversies around pageants, the two that I remember were the inclusion of trans women, for example, in women's pageants, which I think the Miss Universe has allowed, which I think is a good thing. That is absolutely a good thing. And in some ways, then we can see that pageants have become a way to also disrupt these normative assumptions we have. Obviously, that's not a perfect solution, but I think that's a good thing. The next is, I don't know if you all remember, I think 3 years ago, there was this drama around Miss Earth, because someone exposed sexual harassment that was happening on pageant grounds. So there's been some research here as well that suggests that, beauty pageants in some ways, like the sponsors can behave in quite predatory ways towards the candidates. And because when we talk about pageants, we shouldn't just talk about the stage. We should talk about the structural, environment as well, like the power relationships there. And yeah, that I think received a lot of attention, and I think people were like, we need more oversight over the power of sponsors and handlers over the women, because they're exploiting that power dynamic there, right? So I was reminded of that. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, that goes to our next question. Like, so we talked about a lot of the issues we have about beauty pageants, but what are the pros to beauty pageants? I think Sharmila started with some. Do you want to continue that, Sharmila?
Yeah. Oh, I think there are so many pros. um, and so I would be inclined to agree that pageants can definitely be a site for, empowerment. And one thing I want to add here in our conversation actually is, we're talking a lot about Miss Universe or the big high profile women's competitions, right? But actually beauty pageants are a lot more widespread than that. So they happen also for, straight, gay, trans individuals, for marginalized groups. So I don't know how many of you have watched Sunday Beauty Queen, for example. So OFWs doing beauty pageant in Hong Kong, or even like Paris is Burning, and the voguing culture for trans individuals. Like, pageants are more than just Miss Universe, so we should maybe expand that, I feel. And in those situations you're talking about, pageants are important for recognition and for self-affirmation, right? For raising the esteem of people, simply just saying, hi, we're here. We refuse for mainstream media to take full control over how we are depicted. We're taking control over how we look and how we project ourselves. I think there's so much potential there in pageants.
Yeah, and I think just to go off that, because I also want to go into the pros, but kind of connecting it as well with the last question, I think the cons really are its history. And, we have to look at the historical context through new lens now and see how harmful some of that messaging was to young women and even sometimes continues to be. So the long history of beauty pageants, is not just colonization, as Mia said, but it's also found roots in religion and yes, even celebration of what it means to be beautiful. So, back in the Spanish colonial period, you had the introduction of the Reina Elena, which was done for the purposes of celebrating the virginity of Mother Mary. And you chose a queen based off of who you believe captured her essence. So now, of course, we recognize how virginity and being modest can be harmful ideas of young women that continue to perpetuate in later in life, that, your virginity is tied to your self-worth. But again, at that time, it's just really a snapshot of the time itself. So while I would love to argue that the origins of beauty pageants were just for the celebration of religion, going back to what we said earlier, you look at the Trump era of Miss Universe and how harmful it was for women like Alicia Mercado, who Trump called Miss Piggy, and how she and, as Sharmila said, came forward with stories of not just sexualization, but also being degraded. So looking at examples, it's really clear that pageants are products of their time, a reflection of the society. And so that doesn't excuse the message that they impose on young women, and it certainly doesn't excuse the language used to sexualize them that enables other forms of violence. But there has been so much progress made to the purpose and the role of pageantry in society to today. So for example, right now we have 3 reigning queens who are part of the Black community. And now young Black girls have even more role models and visibility in their society. You have girls like Billie, for example, who have talked about her own experience as a gender advocate and her experience with bisexual erasure and fetishization. And even Miss Grant International, has been a platform for Miss Myanmar to discuss the violence against her people. And now the pageant itself is supporting her and protecting her against calls for her arrest back in Myanmar. So of course we should keep challenging the queens and the pageants themselves to advocate for more inclusion, but that doesn't mean that they aren't championing causes now. And you have girls, even in times that you didn't think was possible. Irene Saez, who was mayor of Venezuela, later became a presidential candidate. And it's the pros really as it's continuing to evolve and continuing to capture the multi-dimensionality of women. And, Miss Japan, for example, became the first winner from Asia, and that shifted the idea of what it meant of beauty, because at that time it was just blonde and blue eyes, and it just completely shifted the idea. And, even in 1977, the first Miss Universe who was a Black woman, at that time there was still segregation of schools. So pageantry has really served as a catalyst for changing not just the traditional definition of beauty, but even how we see ourselves in society.
I'd like to butt in now. Actually, what Kali said is very true, because pageants before, at least in the past, they were just seen as a way for people to objectify women. But now we see that it is through beauty pageants that women are actually reclaiming their roles as queens, that they use this platform as a way for them to promote their advocacies. Because before, pageants were just all about strutting their stuff, wearing the nicest gowns, the swimsuits. But now we see things like the Q&As, the what exactly are the social issues that they want to advocate and use their crown for. And what we see now is that these women are becoming role models, not just for their particular communities or their countries or countries that they represent, but also other viewers, because pageants can be double-edged swords in the way that they promote particular ideals. And when we see more variety in these kinds of ideals that are being promoted, if we see more messages of inclusion or compassion towards different sectors that are in need, the women who are in power as queens can use these beauty pageants productively and positively, so that they can champion for the needs and for the rights of the people that they seek to represent.
So I guess to add to all of that, I'm just gonna talk about something personal. I mean, from the candidate's point of view. So pros, mainly beauty pageants are actually an amazing marketing avenue for the girls, and whatever career path they choose to have in the future, this having this in their CVs, in their resumes, or just the growth that they get from joining beauty pageants is actually a big thing. In fact, before when I used to work as an HR assistant in a big airline, there's a separate folder for girls who previously joined a pageant. And that's something, it doesn't mean that they're automatically going to get hired, but that kind of appreciation from organizations and other industries is something that I can consider as a pros. And as sorry, as you said earlier, pageants can be considered as a tool, which can be very beneficial for the girls when used the right way. And yeah, it gives the girls the opportunity, or well, I hate to say this, but a shortcut to specific careers. To be specific in perhaps fashion industry or entertainment industry. And yes, beauty pageants have a lot of potential. Let's admit it, we have the ability to influence people, and we have to use this to our advantage, wherein we show representations of every type of beauty, make it diverse, make it controversial for all the right reasons. And a lot of people would say that it's too idealistic, but I'd like to think that somehow, with a little bit more effort and guts, we will be able to do it. And as an example, if you look at all the candidates for Miss Universe Philippines last year, um, all of Filipino beauty was well represented. You have all types of skin color, hair, height, sizes, everything is there from all walks of lives. And another thing that I like now is that more and more pageants are being managed and being owned by women, resulting to a big change in pageant culture from a very strong patriarchal hold in the past. So that's something that I really, really appreciate. But cons, it's super easy to lose yourself in it. If a candidate doesn't have a strong sense of who she is, there is a really big possibility that she will just follow whatever her coaches, her team, her fans wants her to do. And we don't want that, because that's when the pressure builds up for the girl. And we have to do things for us first, and not just because people around us said so. Like, for example, having surgeries or having things done in your face, things like that.
Uh, then I just wanted to pick up on what some of our speakers have been talking about. So we've talked about a lot of the historical cons, and I love how Kali kind of contextualized it in our religious history. So it's really not just a modern or a current phenomenon, but it dates back to celebrations of particular tropes of women. And we've also talked about how those have evolved over the years. And Sharmila also talked about how uh, pageants exist beyond what we see in the mainstream, which I think is a great thing to think about. Like, I think a lot of us, when we talk about beauty pageants, automatically we think Miss Universe, Miss World. But it's fascinating to think about other forms of pageants, including pageants among OFWs, among transgender and non-gender conforming individuals. That said, I do also want to pick up on some implications maybe of practices that still do exist even in contemporary beauty pageants. So I'm going to make a couple of disclaimers. My first disclaimer is that I'm mainly talking about mainstream pageants because that's I'm more familiar with how those work, although I'm no expert. Honestly, like I've never been a big viewer of pageants, so I could be getting some details wrong. My second disclaimer is that I do want to be clear. I think most of you know this already, but I just want to be clear that critiques of beauty pageants as an industry, um, as events, are not critiques of individual contestants themselves. So having said that, I want to pick up on first. Mia pointed out how pageants have been critiqued over time. because of the idea that they promote unattainable ideals of beauty. So a lot of the speakers have talked about how over time those have evolved and broadened to a certain extent, so that more diverse ranges of skin color, ethnicity, race are recognized and celebrated. But at the same time, I think that when we look at the rules that are set by many mainstream pageants about who can and cannot join in the first place, there are still many limiting qualifiers. You cannot join a pageant, most pageants, if you are shorter than a certain height. So for women in many countries, that's already quite a limiting factor. And your body proportions are often also a major factor for to determine whether or not you can join. So when we talk about the idea that pageants can be a space for women to talk about, to share their advocacies, to influence the world, it makes me wonder which women, because not all of us can get to use that platform, right? And then another thing, I definitely I would love to hear your thoughts on that. But I also wanted to bring up something related to what Callie said about how pageants can be traced back to religious celebrations. And I think that to some extent we can still see echoes of the types or images of women that were celebrated in those religious celebrations. When we look at some other rules that are still imposed on mainstream beauty pageants, at least. So rules, for example, like, if I'm not mistaken, many pageants are limited to non-married women. They are limited to women who have never given birth. Uh, so that makes me question, why is that?
Yes.
Things like, it's certainly very, very, I do consider it a big win. Sharmila mentioned that transgender women are now included clearly in mainstream beauty pageants. I think that's a big win. Um, but yeah, so it for me, the point I'm trying to get to is this idea that in pageants, there's this kind of uh, sort of fine line where women's certain forms of sexuality, beauty are appreciated, but being an overtly sexual person can get you disqualified if you are too risque in how you are perceived, or if you are associated with overtly sexual behaviors or history. You could get disqualified. So I'm curious about what the speakers think of those questions or those issues.
Okay, hold on. So yeah, keep that in mind, but also please answer this question. So very, very briefly, like yes or no, can you support beauty pageants and be a feminist? Because I think that's related to what Bea is mentioning about the problems of giving voices to pageant women. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll go ahead and start if that's okay. Okay, so first off, I'm going to say yes. I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. And I'm going to go ahead and start by addressing Bea's point, because I mean, honestly, I really do agree. It to me makes no sense why we are still policing women in society. Why would we also continue to police them on a platform where we are trying to empower them, right? But at the same time, like I said earlier, it is still a reflection of our time. While I would hope for that fundamental shift, and I think all of us kind of do hope for it, the more realistic view, at least in my opinion, is that it's going to slowly change. So, we have to start with the next generation, explain to them that sexuality doesn't mean that you're less of a woman. And then I think from there, 10 years from now, the beauty pageant industry will do that as well. So, for example, intersectionality is not something that we talked about like up until the past few years even. Well, at least I did. I just, wasn't so aware. But it's something that's been around since the 80s. So I think it does really have to reach that mainstream. So while pageantry is still a little bit behind as to our discussions and as to what we're trying to advocate, it is evolving in its own way. And, as earlier mentioned, there are inclusions of trans women. There are inclusions of women who are just a little bit bigger, I wouldn't call it complete body positivity, But you have girls like the in 2016 Miss Canada reaching the top 10, who was claimed, was essentially a body positivity advocate for some women. So you wouldn't see stuff like that before. And so, you still see that again, as I mentioned in the historical context about how we're still treating girls as their modesty is the most important thing. So again, I think society really does have to make that mainstream before beauty pageants do. And to hold beauty pageants to even a higher standard of our society, I think can sometimes be unrealistic. So while it is a great platform, I'm going to go ahead and mention my last point, which is why is it not a platform for all women, right? That's a really hard question to answer. And I, again, really hope that we keep evolving, because the standards of height, of body proportions, of cisgenderedness doesn't make sense, considering that, we have recognized the infinite variability of women and how all women are beautiful. So I would like beauty pageants to be more intersectional in that aspect. And I do believe that you can support beauty pageants as they are now and still be a feminist. And the reason I say this is because, we've recognized now that housewives and CEOs, you can choose either one. And that doesn't make you less or more of a woman. And we've recognized also not just career options, but how you express yourself, your gender expression. All forms are valid. So while we would want to push for more intersectionality, we also can't deny the role that pageants have to bring issues to light. And we shouldn't be gatekeeping feminism to say that certain gender expressions aren't valid or certain career paths aren't valid. So I don't think it should apply to beauty queens or to the pageantry industry. But bottom line, I do wish it to be more intersectional, and that we, as pageant supporters or pageant criticizers or beauty queens, continue to push for that as well.
For the first one, yes, feminists and beauty queens or pageant fanatics can be feminists and be themselves, be pageant fanatics. I am a feminist first before becoming one, before becoming a pageant girl. And Callie was right. It can come in. It's not mutually exclusive. So, but for your other questions, there are actually. I don't want to sound too defensive, but there are pageants that are meant for married women and women who have children. And basically, the reason behind Miss Universe or Miss World or other pageants who don't allow that is because the job is extremely taxing, and it would require a lot of their time, their attention, and their effort. And they didn't want their queen's attention to be split. And it would require the queens also to travel to all sorts of places, and having the emotional attachment to your family, to your kids would be difficult, or can be difficult to handle for the queen or for the candidates. So I think that's one of the reasons. But there are also pageants meant for them. Some are called Mrs. Universe, Mrs. World, I think, Mrs. International. But these beauty pageants are mainly for celebration of their motherhood, them being or having a family life, and and still being super comfortable and super confident about themselves. And I applaud that. I like that we have um, pageants like that. And of course, we mentioned also earlier Miss Gay, other sorts of pageants. There are reason behind all these things. In terms of height and stuff, it's actually fading already. I'm actually surprised that here in the Philippines they allowed me to compete with the short hair, because that has never been done before. And to have a top five finish is actually very, very surprising, because no one expected that. Philippines wasn't ready for that kind of, or this kind of queen. And I even said on stage that I'm bisexual, and people applauded me for that, and they applauded the Miss Universe organization for um, allowing me to compete, or being super open about that, despite being in a country that is super religious, and I don't want to say close-minded, but we still don't talk about these stuff often. So we are still very close-minded about sensitive issues like this. But we have to say something. We have to speak up. We have to tell it to the world that we exist. And I love the fact that members of LGBTQ community felt that they exist after my pre-pageant speech. So Callie was right. It is evolving very slowly, yes, but it does have a lot of potential, and I think that we have to give it a we have to give it a shot. We have to give it a chance.
Um, I'd like to add to your points earlier. So I also think that yes, you can be a supporter of beauty pageants and also be a feminist at the same time. In fact, I think that would be the ideal combination because when you support or when you become involved in the pageant world and you are a promoter of feminist ideologies and thought, then you become a positive catalyst for change. When, as Miss Sharmila mentioned earlier, the fact that pageantry doesn't confine itself to just what happens on stage. We look at how the pageant girls are being trained, how the filtering or screening process goes, and when we see the kinds of role models, the kinds of queens that we have reigning now, we have them setting the precedent for the future selections and screenings, the new standards that are evolving and changing as these new queens come up and rise to their new roles as representations of what new ideals can become. So I think that when it comes to the outdated practices or the negative aspects of the pageant world, it is something that can still be addressed now. It's not too late for the for people to fix this. Fixed. This could be fixed just in the level of the training, the camps, the beauty camps, or also in terms of how the audiences are receiving or are being receptive to the kinds of representations that these queens are making. Because when the organizers of these pageants see that audiences are actually promoting or supporting ideas that would promote the rights of the LGBTs, then these communities, the marginalized sectors, will be able to have a chance to be more well represented and to have their rights be better advocated in the future pageants to come.
Yeah, so just to add to that, right? I think feminists need to be comfortable with ambivalence. I am not a fan of a type of feminism that says these things are absolutely bad and these things are absolutely good and putting things into neat little boxes, because that's not how the world works. The way the world works is, whether we like it or not, we exist in a patriarchal society. We exist in a capitalist society. So whatever resistance we are going to be developing against patriarchy or against capitalism will have to be built within that same oppressive world that we live in, right? So it would be unreasonable to say, oh, no, 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 we need a completely inclusive pageant with no patriarchal standards whatsoever. That is the only thing I'm ever going to support as a feminist. Like, feminists have to make these trade-offs all the time. We have to, embrace ambivalence all the time. Now, having said that, there is a difference again between some change and co-optation. Like, there is also change that is token and there's change that is actually transformative. And I think that's the question we ask ourselves with pageants. Now, with the non-mainstream pageants I've talked about, I'm a lot more comfortable saying enthusiastically yes. Now, with the more mainstream pageants, I am a little bit more uneasy. I still think you can be feminist while supporting them, but I'll maybe just highlight my discomfort. Some of you have already discussed. One, it does bother me that we don't seem to be as excited about having men parade around in skimpy clothes and answer short questions. Yes, these pageants exist, as I've said, but they are not occupying a prominent place in the public imagination. Ultimately, it is still about women's bodies, right? And yes, the criteria is slowly evolving, that's true, but the fact that you still can't join if you've had a child, there's a morality clause, if you've seen and if you've been accused of engaging in sex work, for example, or if you've been previously married, which means there are still all these standards that are still, sadly, whether we like it or not, they're dominant, right? I think that's an uncontroversial claim. That is still what the Terran looks like. So I think we need to reflect very carefully which changes are meaningful changes, and therefore we support that, but which changes might be kind of token, like appeal to a more progressive audience, but not too much. So I would be very curious about the content of what pageant winners are saying, the specific advocacies they're taking up, and are they risky advocacies? Are they actually truly disruptive, or are they nice sound bites? And I think we have a combination of both, and we're seeing a combination of both, which is why I'm grateful. So I guess what I would say about feminism is, yes, there might be potential. The same site of oppression can become a site of resistance, and these things happen at the same time, simultaneously, right? But we need to, it's not an uncritical acceptance, though, because even if we're saying, hello, the field is expanding and we're becoming more inclusive of body types and types of women, it's still a very narrow range of difference that we have, and that needs to be expanded further. Otherwise, that then just becomes a tokenistic legitimizing justification. So I'm very uncomfortable about this, but it's a difficult question. It's a really, really difficult question, and a lot of the answers I feel are contextual. It also depends on the candidate, right? So if this candidate comes in with a very clear agenda of what they want the pageant to do for them and what they are going to do with their platform, so for that specific candidate, it was probably an empowering experience. A different candidate might have a different journey or a different experience as well. So I guess my answer to you is, this is quite contextual, but let's not miss the bigger picture here. The bigger picture is, we do have some problematic standards that still happen to be the dominant standards. They're still predominantly gendered. There still are some standards of beauty that are dominating. So those things need to be challenged. Those things need to be disrupted. I don't think we should have uncritical acceptance, but I would lean towards seeing the potential here.
Yeah. Bea?
Thank you, everyone, for those very, very thoughtful answers. I like how I think there's a general consensus that we do see that being a feminist does not have to be contradictory to being involved in the pageant world. At the same time, Sharmila has pointed out that there are questions we need to continue to grapple with. So it might not be a simple matter of just saying, hey, I'm a feminist and I'm also into pageants, and it's all good. And I think that a lot of what we've been discussing tonight really has revolved around those tricky questions, those difficult questions that we might need to continue asking. I don't know if I'm supposed to answer the question also, but personally, I do agree, absolutely. Like Sharmila, I'm also not fond of the kind of feminism that says, oh, this is what a feminist should look like and only this, or this is what feminists should do with their lives and only this. So if anything, I'm happy to observe, I think what Billie and Callie have pointed out, that when women who have clear feminist points of view enter the pageant world, they can bring those points of view with them and try to transform these spaces, these events with their views. Having said that, I am kind of curious about, this ties into something Sharmila said. So Sharmila was talking about how many contestants, especially now, do bring a lot of social advocacies with them. But I'm curious about whether there are, how do I put this? Are there limitations on how contestants can talk about their advocacies? Are there, for example, is it possible for a contestant to be parang vocal in criticizing a particular political figure, a particular regime? So I guess this is a question that I'm not too familiar with. So I wonder about the point of view of those who are more like the insiders in the group.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So hold on. This also ties in with this question. So can beauty pageants actually be empowering? Like, can you really talk about these things, these more controversial things that's actually being asked in the comments? What are the topics that you can actually talk about if you're a beauty queen? So let's hear from you guys.
I'm gonna go ahead and sorry, no, you go. Please
No,
go. Okay. So to just start there, point on how we train the girls, and I guess it really does differ from trainer to trainer, and it differs from what the queen themselves want to say. I always say that this is your personal journey, and I'm not really in charge of the messaging or even the packaging. My goal is to equip the girls with the tools that they need to find their own message. But that does sound very generic. I understand that's like, is she really answering the question? I've trained the Miss Universe girls this past year and currently BVP for ACES. And we do discuss a lot of political topics, a lot of current issues. And everything from EJKs to the International Criminal Court ruling on it and how the government is accepting it, and the voting recount, just really polarizing topics that they might get asked on a national stage. And I always invite the girls to form their own opinion. And the way that they do that and the way that they present it themselves is we give them the tools to understand the fundamental right. So I think by giving them the knowledge of, what exactly is the right of suffrage, what exactly is the right to due process, then they can form those decisions themselves. And again, I'm not even entirely sure if I answered the question of how do you get, if you get asked a question about President Duterte or Harry Roque. Personally, I would have some words, but that's the reason why I'm not a queen, I'm a coach. So, we go back to the principle. I always invite them, at the end of the day, you are representing the entire Philippines, and that is an impossible job because, you have your own opinions. You are a person with your own individual agency, and you cannot possibly capture the minds of millions of Filipinos around the globe. So your goal is, yes, to inspire, and yes, to still have a message, but at the same time, make sure that message is rooted in something that is a fundamental right, or is rooted in something that, you aren't polarizing half the audience, but you're still saying a message. So that's the goal, is it's not about talking bad about the president or the government or whatever, which, I kind of hope that they do sometimes, but that's just me. The goal is to make sure that they understand the rights as to what is being protested. When we talk about the Anti-Terrorism Act, I don't expect them to go into the legalese of it. I expect them to understand why people are concerned about their restriction of freedom of speech. So in that aspect, I do think that in some ways, you do have to police yourself. You do have to make sure that you are not going against what half the country might think, but you're still trying to give a message. You're still trying to empower people with the knowledge of their rights, with the knowledge that your message is coming from a place of empathy, of yes knowledge, of yes concern, but ultimately that you're doing it for your country. So that is the reason why I got into pageantry and why I love it, is because I feel like these girls, like Rabia, for example, now go onto the world stage and represent the Philippines in a manner that some of us never would be able to give a message of hope, to give a message spreading her advocacy of education, to talk about the state of Philippine education. And while she might not say the nitty gritty details, she is still giving something that is of just concrete value to the society. So yes, I do think it can be empowering.
Billie?
And super, super thank you to coaches like you, Callie, for allowing us to do that. Because to be perfectly honest, part of the standards of becoming a beauty queen before, part of the training is to have, well, if you're given a polarizing question, don't pick. Don't pick a side. That's always the rule. Don't pick a side, try to be the uniting force, blah, blah, blah. But what if the girl has a say? What if she has her personal opinion? So most of the time it was just suppressed. But now, again, the evolution of pageantry, we now can use our voice. We are sort of allowed to speak up and say some things like, I am a survivor of gender based violence abuse right in front of Harry Roque in the middle of the Pemberton issue and the Laude issue. And that was extremely empowering. Like, I was only the fourth runner up, but I was super hyped at the moment. I was angry, to be honest, because it was I was in the heat at the moment. I was angry. It was sitting right in front of me. And this thing that I'm doing right now, I can't do this like 5 years ago. I can't say stuff like this. But with the new breed of coaches and trainings that we have, we can voice out our opinions. We can voice out our minds. And my goal in the competition was to champion for individuality, and I was known for having the guts to sport short hair and be bisexual in the competition and to just break the mold of the Philippine standard of beauty, which is hardly broken. And it was especially empowering because I was able to share my truth and show every side of me while feeling confident with my flaws, because my goal was to show how imperfect I am and still be considered as a beauty queen. And another thing that I would like to highlight is the empowering moment of just that moment, that 30 second of holding the mic. You have the power to say something that can just twist people's mind or just bend or just make them think at least. Maybe about voting, maybe about feminism, maybe something about maybe a major issue about the world. In just 30 seconds, you have that kind of power. And if you in fact actually win that, who knows what you can do in the amount of time that you're reigning. And it's another example is that I've received a lot of appreciation posts and messages wherein um, audience and viewers were sharing their experiences as members of LGBTQ community and how they felt at their seat. I've said that earlier, and a bunch of people found a newfound appreciation for short-haired girls. Some people with eczema, because that's my condition with my skin, and they no longer felt the need to hide their skin. They were actually inspired, and I was never the type of person who feels comfortable with just conforming with the norm or with the standard just because I'm comfortable with it. And I love the fact that Miss Universe Philippines appreciated that and they allowed me to show that on a bigger stage or a bigger platform.
So I don't know, like I seem to have I seem to think that the topics that beauty queens just talk about are kind of like in the basic level still. Like for example, our group usually talks about the really controversial topics, the progressive topics such as is sex work really, is sex work okay, or if abortion is okay, things like that. But like the level of discourse that queens are allowed to talk about, parang it's still in a different level? Or do you think like if a beauty queen just suddenly talks about these more controversial issues, would it be okay?
I think yes. I think it is okay. And I think the society and with the amount of followings that we have, with the number of ears listening to us, I think it is okay to voice out our opinions, our stand on certain sensitive topics or issues. I think now more than ever, we need someone to actually talk about it.
Yeah, I will say I feel that there is a bit of a shift. Am I completely happy with it? No, but like for example, Catriona or comments against authoritarianism, for example, or Miss Myanmar, right? I do feel like there is a little bit more risk taking that is taking place. There's a little bit more speaking truth to power. This, though, part of the reason they're very notable is because they are the exception. That's still not the norm, right? But I guess I'm going to take some hope in these exceptions because even Pia's advocacy for, HIV, LGBT rights, I do think it's not just surface level lip service. There's a genuine history there. And some of the comments are not, just pleasing everyone. But again, they still are the exception. So hopefully this is a trend. Is this actually a trend? I'm not sure. But yeah, I just wanted to call attention to that.
And I think to add to that, you have people like Gazini, for example, that recently went to the launch of One Sambayan and talked about people needing to go out and vote because Filipinos are tired of what's going on now. Mind you, she is a current reigning queen, and for her to go to One Sambayan and to speak out against the current regime essentially was just monumental. I had the pleasure of meeting her there, but I never would have thought that a reigning queen would really have the guts to do that. So while it is, yes, for the most part, exceptions to the rule, we've really seen a shift over the past year. But I think it can also turn to the fact that like everybody, I think, is scared on some level to speak out. That everyone feels like if I say something right now, will I be red tagged? If I say something right now, will my life be threatened? Will my security be threatened? What more people that have millions of people watching them? So while I completely agree with the rest of with the general view that, beauty queens need to do more, beauty queens need to keep speaking out, beauty queens need to keep learning about this. I myself, I have like no following on Instagram. No one really checks my Instagram stories, sad. But
I do.
Okay, thank you, sis. No, but I'm still scared on some level to be red tagged. So, when people come out and really go against it, girls like Catriona or Gazzini or Pia or Billie, you have to admire not just their knowledge and not just their advocacies, but the fact that they are putting themselves essentially on that front line already. So that's my view.
Thank you. And yeah, Mia.
Hearing all of these insights actually reminded me of this concept that I came across in my studies. There's the idea of a women as nation thesis that when we talk about the practices or the markers that a beauty queen represents or shows to the world, these function as vehicles of representation and a reproduction of the identity of that community she's representing. So I think that the idea that the statements of these beauty queens are very general, I think it's because the beauty queen also is presented with a challenge of having to balance or temper her own personal ideas and views with that of the community. She has to give statements or take a stance that is in touch or rooted in the values of the society she's trying to represent, because that is the way that she can stay connected to the people and that the people can continue to find hope in her in how she represents them and their views. So I think that this shift has been a very positive shift. It's still an exception, yes, but as we see these queens getting more and more involved in their communities and getting to be more aware of what exactly are the issues that need to be addressed, like voting, like HIV concerns, all of these advocacies come from the fact that beauty queens themselves are not just, seeing everything from a bird's eye view, but rather they're from the grassroots, they're understanding and even possibly facing these kinds of issues firsthand. And that is how they're able to represent their communities on a deeper level and promote a deeper level of change as well.
Yeah, thank you, Mia. And now let's talk about what the impact is on the youth. So maybe you guys have some insights on that.
Um, should I start? Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll start from my point of view when I was still a young girl. So before I really had no interest with beauty, like could care less. But to me, at that time, the way I saw it is that beauty pageants are only for people who have money, people who have certain status and position in life. It's only for the elite. I didn't really care for their hair or makeup or how they look. Yeah, they're pretty, they're very beautiful, but that's it to me. And that was me as a kid. I never saw its importance because I don't see much of it. I only see it because sometimes it's on the news. But it basically told me that it's a glamorous thing that is only accessible to specific types of people, and that its only role in the society is a distraction from the reality. And that's how I saw it. But the first time I joined, I resisted the whole idea. I hated it. I didn't want to be there. It seemed so pathetic for me. But that was from a vantage point of someone who is privileged enough to go to a good school, to not think about her tuition fee, who has food and whose family is healthy. But I never stopped to think that maybe some of these girls are here because the price is a scholarship program. The money can help them feed or buy medicine for their family, or experience some sort of comfort in their lifestyle. And now it's a whole new different era. And with social media, being very accessible even to kids, it's a different story. I've heard girls and young LGBTQ members telling us how they wanted to be just like us. And with that much followings, it's very important for us to really show them all the different types of beauty or the looks or everything. There was an instance when I was asked what advice would I give to a young pageant enthusiast and who wanted to join a beauty pageant. And I said, my answer was, do not join. Don't do it. Don't do it because you think it's glamorous or because you think it's all fancied up. Join after finishing school, maybe experiencing life, seeing your surroundings, and then if you still really want to join, then now you have the ammo to share to the world the stories, your life stories, your hardships, your challenges, and use that to inspire people. Only then can you join a beauty pageant. It's not just because you look pretty or you're tall enough or you're all this and that. Join because in you, you really wanted to do something positive to the world and you think that beauty pageant can help you with that. So I hope that that's the um, message that I convey to my young audiences. And so far, the messages or the appreciation that I've been receiving in the past couple of months tells me that I've been succeeding so far.
I guess I'll go ahead and just say that I think that it does influence the youth, but it really depends on how that message is given. And I think that goes with anything. You know, you have WAP, for example, playing on the radio, which I love as a song, but, you know, might need to be a little bit more policed for younger minds. And it really goes down to not just the parents, not just the schools, not just to how the community receives it, but the queens and the pageants themselves and how they put their message out there. So the influence to the youth would really go to, we need to remind young girls, of course, that the queens and the pageantry isn't just about being a pretty face. It's about their ability to inspire in their messaging. And I think that inspiration comes from the fact that these are everyday people. And, you know, they can shine and have a message just despite maybe a lack of privilege in finances or a lack of privilege for being in not having a strong education. But, you know, they come from a mix of backgrounds. Like I said earlier, flight attendants, business owners, nurses, and I think people really do see themselves in them. And Billie's experience in particular has shown how visibility for the youth is so important. Young LGBTQIA plus community members that look up to her now, people that would want to express themselves in a way that isn't hyper feminine. Billie's been a good example of that. People that see themselves maybe not beautiful because they feel like they should be lighter skinned, look up to girls like April Smith and look up to girls that are now the reigning Miss Universes of reigning Miss Universe this year, Miss Grand International. So it does come with the responsibility of not just the pageant community, but I think society at large to remind young girls in particular that beauty isn't everything, that beauty pageants, while they might be called beauty pageants, are a celebration of the entirety of the woman, because we ourselves recognize that, you know, we aren't just faces, that we are people, that we have hopes and dreams and ambitions. And I wish that people looked at queens as, like that as well, and that they remind young girls continuously that presentation doesn't always equal success, or that that is what we should achieve. But like Sharmila also said earlier, we do live in a society where we're working within the patriarchal structure. So we still have to explain, we still have to try to change minds at a young age. And that shift really only does happen through young women. So it is about continuously reaching out to them and pushing it so that eventually when they enter pageants or when they are at the age that we are now to discuss pageantry, that it is more intersectional, that it is more of a reflection of their our hopes for 20 years from now.
Any thoughts, Mia?
Well, I agree with everything that's already been said, but I guess to add, it's really in the fact, or it's really in how the active members of the pageant industry use their roles responsibly, because they're the ones who are able to truly shape the standards or the ideals that oftentimes people would look towards or look to seek role models in. I remember during the time that I would interview young pageant hopefuls or even audience members, like when they're just little girls watching TV or even little boys watching TV, and they see these beauty queens up on stage showing off what exactly beauty means for their communities. They set a particular ideal that these little boys and girls would look up to in the future. And it's not just a physical idea, like this is how I'm gonna do my makeup, this is how I'm gonna do a lava walk, or all that, the gowns, etc. It's also in the kinds of values that are being represented. Sometimes, if we could recall the iconic line of being confidently beautiful with a heart, like Pia's line was something that was very iconic, yes, but it was also something that was very meaningful or inspirational, and it set a tone that, the audience members, the youth who would hear her words now, they would be able to carry on or continue to live out that kind of message or that kind of value as they grow up, because they were able to be inspired by what she does. So it's really about having these active players, these queens, and the coaches also in these camps, that inculcate in the minds of these queens that they are not just representing the current trend or the current ideal, but they're also active shapers in setting the standard of what the future ideals should continue to become or grow into.
Thank you. Thank you, Mia. And actually, so we've heard a lot of pros and a lot of cons to these beauty pageants. So, my next and last question is, how can beauty pageants be improved?
Um, I could suggest some
Yeah, yeah,
things
go
here.
ahead.
So the way we tell stories is very important, right? And I think when we tell the story of beauty pageants, there needs to be intellectual honesty there. There needs to be, which is why I really loved what Callie said, there needs to be a reckoning with the sexist, the colonial legacies of beauty pageants as they've happened, right? Like that needs to be acknowledged, that needs to be accepted. Because then only then can you really correct that and move forward. Because there seem to be, attempts to kind of gloss over that or pretend that that was just accidental or whatever. No, it was intentionally privileging certain attributes over others, right? So that needs to happen. There needs to be an honest transcript there. And in this conversation, I'm glad, because that seems to at least take place. That's one. Two, I do think we should engage with pageants in more intentional ways and in more critical ways. So when I don't know if I might be giving away my age, when Miriam Kiambao made all these homophobic statements at the height of her fame, and people called her out, right? The LGBT community was like, "Ang kapal ng mukha mo. We are the people who supported you and backed you. How could you do that?" I don't think a queen is gonna get away with that now, right? So I feel like call people out and like be critical. Also, we need to keep calling out the criteria and just insist on democratizing the criteria further. I don't think we'll ever reach a point of like complete egalitarianism, but we need to chip away at that. Like at some point, I'm unclear why, if you've had a child or if you are married or if you're a sex worker, you shouldn't be here. So I'm all for, entertainment, but entertainment is political. And so we need to, in the same way we are critical of Manny Pacquiao, even if some of us might be happy when he wins. I'm not sure if anyone in this group is, but kind of like that. Like we need to be very critical on how we engage with it and keep pushing for these changes, or not buy into it. Because I think if pageants don't evolve, at some point they might become less relevant than they were, because there will be alternative sources of influence, like influencers who are willing to say more truthful things might become more popular, or WAP, or all of those things, right? So pageants will have to evolve if they want to stay relevant anyway, and so we need to keep applying that pressure.
Yeah. So I think one big step for a better beauty pageant industry is for more owners or national directors, more women national directors, and more women owners of beauty pageants. Because honestly, with Miss Universe Philippines, which is owned by Miss Shamsi Supsup, a previous Miss Universe candidate also, there is this safety blanket around the candidates. That feeling that she's not going to let us. This is referring to the Miss Earth issue from before about harassment, because that is still very rampant in the industry. It's not talked about, but it's still there, especially for male pageants. So that safety blanket from knowing that your leader, your head is a woman and she understands your struggles, she understands your fear as a candidate is something that is something that should be addressed for future pageants. And another thing is I know this is super far fetched, and I don't think it's gonna happen in the near future, but a more supportive audience. Because right now, to be perfectly honest, we have a very destructive audience. And as much as we want to voice out our minds, it's really scary. Bashing is really scary, and it just chips a part of you piece by piece every time you read negative comments or every time people disagree with you. But I know reality wise, it's not going to happen. But hopefully in the future, um, you'll have tougher queens to compensate for that because we really need to say something. We really need to speak up. And I hope it actually becomes a trend, as you guys said earlier. So I think those areas needs more improvement.
Yeah, I think definitely more intersectional. We've had trans women on the world stage, not enough. Not Philippines still hasn't included trans women. We need married women to be allowed. Women who have given birth. There's absolutely no reason to exclude them. We definitely need more representation, more visibility of people of all different communities, whether they're able-bodied or not, cisgender or not. On any form of the gender spectrum, and from every single background of life. But there are those small improvements, and I like to think that it's just not for the purposes of just meeting the standard of what society has set, but that they're trying to push and they're trying to involve more people. But at the same time, we, again, going back to my main point, we are still fighting that amongst ourselves. We're still learning and we're still pushing for these causes. So until they become mainstream, I think it is still going to take a while before beauty pageants to go up there. But as Sharmila said earlier, we would hope that they would take the initiative to make the transformative change rather than just doing what the absolute bare minimum that society has set. So I would like to see beauty pageants more involved in that aspect and really make an effort to recognize the history, to recognize what has been happening in the past, and to make institutional changes to prevent harassment of the women, to prevent women being cyberbullied, for example, women being stripped of their dignity in some aspects just because they decide to join these pageants, when in fact they look at it as an opportunity to empower them. So there are definitely a lot of points of improvement, but I am not entirely happy, but I am excited to see where it is in 10 years, if I'm still coaching, hopefully.
Well, for me, I think that the improvements in the pageant industry, we can start first with the kinds of connections that we have between the queens and the audience, because right now there's still that disjunct, there's still that sense of detachment that queens are just being seen as a model, or as some sort of ideal that's very unattainable. But when we try to have them become more connected, it could be through having more interactive events with them, maybe, or through channels of communication, so that the audience members can relay their ideas or concerns to these kinds of to the queens and to the organizers. Then we can establish a more democratized way of representation in these pageants. And another point that I think that we can improve on is also in the level of the training, the beauty camps, the way that the standards are already set at the screening process pa lang. We can already set the benchmark of what a good beauty queen, or what an ideal standard would be, in terms of how a woman represents her ideas, or in terms of the advocacies that in terms of the depth of how she promotes her advocacies, these are the kinds of things that would already set the bar for what or how connected or how deeply rooted the passion and the level of commitment that a beauty queen aspires to embody when she puts the crown on and when she goes on stage. So we need to fix not only what the audience sees at the final point at the on the TV screen, but also at the level of training, so that we can already initiate change at a more, what did you say, at a more connected or at a deeper level, so that it becomes a more steady change as well. That's it. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to touch on something that Tin asked. Tin asked earlier about the impact of beauty pageants on younger people and children, and I do think that that's something that needs to be talked about as well. As we know, younger people, younger girls, especially adolescents, teenage girls, are already under a lot of pressure as it is. They know perfectly well that there are particular standards of beauty, of size, of how they present themselves that are expected of them. And I think that as of now, mainstream pageants still do continue to reinforce and perpetuate a lot of those standards. So I think that it is going to be really important to keep maybe creating and celebrating other aspects of women's abilities, of girls' abilities that maybe do not center around physical appearance, especially because of the danger of creating an environment, even for people who do not really want to join pageants, but just the general environment of feeling that in order to be valued, you should look a certain way, or you would have more value if you look a certain way. So I guess I would like to see pageants evolve. I don't know if they would still be beauty pageants in that sense, but I guess I would like to see pageants evolve to celebrate aspects of women and girls that are not limited by physical characteristics and physical appearance. Things that have more to do with abilities, opinions, whether these are controversial or not. And I think that is really difficult within the current structures that we have, admittedly, because not just because of the flaws of the pageant industry, but of our general society as well. I also wanted to bring up one more thing very quickly. All of the things we've talked about this evening, we've really centered around pageants for adult women. So I think that the issues surrounding pageants for children are a whole, that's another issue, another set of tricky issues. I think maybe a lot more negative impacts can be seen there. But yeah, so I think there are no easy answers to the question of how pageants can change for the better or to become more feminist. But I think that we have heard some answers tonight that can kind of point us in interesting directions. At the same time, I guess one of the things I've been thinking about tonight is that I hope that there will come a time when girls and women don't feel like they have to join a pageant in order to be heard, in order to voice their experiences, to feel empowered. I hope that pageants will become just one of the many ways in which girls and women can feel empowered and feel heard. Thank you. Sorry, Tin, I think you're on mute.
Okay, so thank
There
you,
we go.
Bea. And so I think there's still a lot to think about regarding this topic. And thank you, everyone, for this great discussion on beauty pageants and how we can improve them. I think it's important what Sharmila said earlier, that we shouldn't put ourselves in boxes and close ourselves. Let's talk about these things, keep learning from others, and join the conversation every Feminist Fridays. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, guys. It was nice meeting you all.